Many people are paying attention to Sam Bankman-Fried's trial, which kicked off this week, yourself included. It has been about 11 months since FTX filed for bankruptcy and SBF stepped down as CEO of the now bankrupt crypto exchange he founded. What was your reaction when that massive failure first happened and when the world learned that SBF, who was once hailed as the white knight of crypto, was in some serious trouble? What message did that send to the crypto industry?
I think it sent a couple powerful messages. One was that it's really difficult to have heroes in this space. I think SBF is someone who came out of nowhere. He didn't really have a background in crypto that went that far. He appeared on the scene, raised a ton of money, built a really powerful brand in the bull market. And then all of a sudden, he had powerful institutional investors and folks in media who were hailing him as the golden boy of crypto. I think that was more the case from those players than it was from internal crypto industry professionals. Not to say anyone saw this coming, but I think one lesson here is that just because someone is charismatic and gets trusted by institutional investors and reporters does not mean that they are someone who's running the industry. The second thing that really was remarkable is just the scale of what happened. We went, I think, within a week from a media report about Alameda, which is the hedge fund associated with FTX, having a balance sheet that was overweight on FTT, which is a token tied to the success of FTX, and then news that CZ, who is another crypto exchange leader, selling FTT, to rumors of bankruptcy with some of the FTX entities to an $8 billion hole. And it happened so quickly, it was just a lot to take in, and incredible how quickly things move in this industry.
Here we are, about 11 months since FTX filed for bankruptcy and 10 months since SBF was arrested. What do you think has changed in the digital asset industry between then and now? Obviously, the collapse led to a huge erosion of trust in crypto, but what do you think were the lessons learned from that massive failure in terms of regulation? Did it highlight the fact that regulation was really needed?
So at the time that FTX collapsed, Sam Bankman-Fried was actually in DC trying to get crypto regulation passed. I think one of the immediate effects that we had of the collapse of FTX and the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried is that DC doesn't see comprehensive crypto regulation as the priority that they did at that time. And I think, unfortunately, we lost the ability to have regulation that would have given us the clarity in this industry that would have been really useful. At the same time, I think that the blowup of FTX really caused a reckoning with the industry about what here really has value, what things are being built that are creating products and services that are improving the world, that are adding efficiencies to the market, and what was sort of bull market fluff. And I think that the collapse of FTX and the decline in crypto asset values really caused people to have to look at what is real here and what was hype.
You're a crypto-focused attorney now, so I'm curious to hear what position you think Bankman-Fried's lawyers will take during his trial, especially since he spoke out publicly at the New York Times DealBook Summit shortly before his arrest. That's where he said he bears responsibility for the, quote, huge management failures at the company. I spoke with an attorney who argued that because he made those public statements, there's no defense for him anymore, that he did nothing wrong. And the defense is now whether he did something intentionally and fraudulently wrong or whether he was negligent and engaged in mismanagement short of fraud. Do you agree?
Yeah, I totally agree that the core of this trial is going to be about intent. So in this particular trial, there are probably going to be more charges brought in subsequent trials, but this trial is really about the question of, did Sam Bankman-Fried knowingly commit fraud by taking what were supposed to be customer assets on FTX, the exchange, that were supposed to be held, in segregated wallets for the benefit of the users whose those assets belong to? Did he take those, lend them out knowingly to Alameda, the hedge fund, to essentially gamble them away and use them for improper purposes? And we know that the defense is going to use two theories here. One is to say it's sort of a light advice of counsel defense. He's going to say, look, there were lawyers in the room for all of this. I got advice from lawyers that I reasonably relied on, and therefore I could not have knowingly done this all wrong or committed fraud. And the other defense is that he's going to claim that there was a wall between FTX, the exchange, and Alameda, the fund, that he kept for conflict of interest purposes, and that he didn't really know what was happening at Alameda. So the mismanagement of customer assets on the Alameda side was not something that he, intended or was directly in charge of.
So Sam Bankman-Fried pleaded not guilty to the charges against him, which include money laundering and fraud. But some of his former colleagues and closest friends pleaded guilty to federal charges against them and have been cooperating with prosecutors. They'll testify against SBF during the trial. Key witnesses include Gary Wang, who co-founded FTX with SBF, and Caroline Ellison, the former CEO of Alameda Research, the crypto exchange's sister hedge fund, which you noted. Both Ellison and Wang have insights into the internal workings of FTX. Ellison was once romantically linked to Bankman-Fried and admitted to misleading actions. So how do you think their testimony will impact SBF's case?
Yeah, I think their testimony is going to be incredibly pivotal to the government's case, especially that of Caroline Ellison, who we know there was a recording from right when the exchange was blowing up, when they thought things might be okay because Binance, a rival exchange, could buy them out, that she essentially held a meeting with some of the FTX employees, apologized to them for what was happening, and said that she and Sam had made the difficult decision to essentially reach into FTX's customer assets to, shore up the Alameda balance sheet, and that had caused the shortfall in funds. That is, I think, as close as the government is going to have to a smoking gun as to SBF's intent here. And so I think, it's going to be really, really hard for SBF to overcome the power of that testimony. Gary, who's also pleaded guilty to helping create the code that allowed Alameda to borrow such an incredible amount of funds from FTX. I think the best the defense can do here is to point to the likely leniency that each of these cooperating witnesses is going to get from the government and say they have every incentive here to make the government happy to get a lighter sentence. But at the end of the day, I think that's going to be hard to sell to the jury.
We're expecting to hear from FTX victims during the trial. How do you think that will impact SBF's case?
I think that's going to be another difficult factor for the defense here. If the government, does its job well, they're going to find people who are sympathetic cases of they invested their money in FTX. You probably hear from people who saw the Super Bowl commercials, all the celebrity endorsements, and thought that FTX was the most buttoned up exchange that you could trade crypto on, a safe place to hold funds, and point towards that, point towards the terms of service that say that user funds would be segregated and held one-to-one, and then point to the reality of those same funds appear to have been used to gamble at Alameda and then were lost.
I recently spoke with a law professor who testified on Capitol Hill during the Senate hearing on the collapse of FTX back in December. And she argued that many of the things that went wrong with FTX are symptomatic of the crypto industry at large. Do you agree with that statement?
I don't really agree with that statement at all. I think this is a case of old-fashioned fraud. What happened here is there was a crypto exchange, people deposited assets, and they thought they owned things like Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana. And in fact, they just had a claim that was not being honored by the fund. There are all sorts of really complicated cases happening in the crypto world right now involving decentralized finance, hacks of smart contracts, stuff like that, that really is about the technology and is industry specific. I think what we're seeing here is really more like garden variety fraud. And I actually expect that the jury doesn't need to understand the intricacies of blockchain technology or various crypto applications in order to understand what the government is alleging here. They just need to understand that people were lied to and that their funds were taken away.
In a nutshell, how do you think this trial will play out?
So today is on Tuesday is the first day of the trial. It'll start with jury selection. And so in federal court in the Southern District of New York, where I used to be a law clerk, jury selection works a little bit different than it does in state court. It begins with a judge asking a series of questions of each juror to try and determine first, is there anyone who needs to be removed from the jury pool because of something that would make them not a fair and impartial juror? And then each of the lawyers have an opportunity to strike jurors that they, for any permissible reason, think will not be a useful juror to them. And that's supposed to create a fair jury pool. And then we're expected to have about 6 weeks of the trial itself. Each side will be able to put on its case. Like we talked about before, I think the government's case is really going to focus on sort of the simple fact of people giving assets to FTX, thinking that those assets were being held safe, and that was in fact not true. The defense's case is going to be really focused on what Sam Bankman-Fried did or did not know, and trying to create as much reasonable doubt as possible as to whether Sam knew that these assets were being used for improper purposes. And then, the jury is going to deliberate and come back with an answer before sentencing. But to be totally honest with you, this fact that Sam Bankman-Fried is even going to trial on this rather than pleading guilty, given the huge amount of evidence that we just know about from public reporting, I think suggests that this trial is really a Hail Mary for the defense. And I wouldn't hold out a lot of hope if I were his defense team of a not guilty verdict.
So to sum everything up, what are the implications of this trial on the crypto industry? What do you think is next for crypto?
So I think since the FTX collapse, crypto's had a real moment of reckoning about, how much of what is being built in crypto is really about building a better financial system, and how much of it is just gambling and speculation. And so I think a lot of the building that's happening now in the industry is focused on plumbing. It's focused on where can we incrementally add value, as opposed to what is going to be the next hot new token? How do we get more people into the casino? And those types of questions. I also think this provides an opportunity for people that want to build infrastructure that would prevent the type of abuse that we saw at FTX. I think people who are building insurance for crypto assets, people who are building what's called non-custodial custody tools, where you allow people to hold their own crypto private keys rather than trusting a custodial source, are going to benefit from this. And it's an opportunity for the industry to really look at how do we build something robust to capture the original promise that blockchain technology was meant to have, rather than more of a casino atmosphere.